South Florida bears a history of segregation, where black and white people were not just separated in their daily lives, but also in death. Black cemeteries are now the focus of a statewide preservation effort. NBC6's Sasha Jones explores how black history once erased, now being rediscovered in the special NBC6 series, Hidden History.
If the peace of the deceased is disturbed, can there ever really be rest for the living?
How could they allow this to happen?
What if we are ignoring amber alerts from the dirt? What do we do with the dead? They're in the way. What if directly under your feet, there were whole communities silenced? The past speaks. Are you listening?
A chain-linked fence separates Lincoln Memorial Park Cemetery from the surrounding community of Brownsville. Inside, thousands of concrete burial vaults speak a history often forgotten in South Florida of black people who shaped, molded, and helped create this region. You'll find prominent names etched on mausoleums, like that of Miami's first black millionaire, or the founder of Miami's first black-owned newspaper. But 2 years ago, Jesse Wooden came looking for one name.
This is Mom. It was cover up here, and I really couldn't find it. So when I got the books, we went down by the road, and I was able to make out the last name. Then we clinked the name plate off, and that's how I was able to find this here. That's my first time in my life finding my mother.
Jesse wasn't raised by his mother. As an adult, he went on the hunt for her final resting place. What he found was a cemetery in disrepair.
It wasn't to my liking for my mother to be kept.
Lincoln is just one example of a much broader issue stretching across our state and country. Black burial grounds, a relic of Jim Crow South, are more likely to be abandoned or neglected. In some cases, they've been erased altogether. In this Tampa public housing complex, residents found out a cemetery laid beneath their homes in 2019.
How could they allow this to happen?
Zion Cemetery was the first of 5 black cemeteries, recently rediscovered after being built over decades ago in the Tampa Bay area.
Can there ever really be rest for the living?
Pushing community members.
Do Black Lives Matter?
Like poet and activist Walter Wally B. Jennings to organize events like this, to shine a light on the issue.
We're uncovering these injustices of these cemeteries that are from the past, pushing for reparations if necessary, whether they are markers, memorials.
And at the state level,
what does making this right look like for our community?
A task force made up of lawmakers and experts are looking at what to do when these cemeteries are found.
It's a statewide issue. There need to be some state resources dedicated to it.
The Abandoned Black Cemeteries Bill, if passed, will create a state agency to help find, research, and preserve these historic sites, with a focus on abandoned or erased black cemeteries. It's unclear if the legislation would do much to help a privately owned cemetery like Lincoln Memorial Park.
They were just burying people so close to each other that you didn't even have a path to get to the grave.
Over the years, financial troubles and a lack of maintenance resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines from the county, leading the previous owner to sell it to a more than willing buyer.
I didn't know nothing about cemetery business. I came from my mother, and to make sure that she was taken care of.
It's a labor of love. He hopes others will help carry on.
The cemetery is going to be here after you're gone.
Correct.
What do you hope for the future?
It takes more than just me to do this. I'm looking for the right peoples with the right attitude that has Lincoln Memorial Cemetery at the forefront of their thought process for better.
Jesse says he hopes to build partnerships with community organizations and the county in order to help preserve Lincoln Memorial Park Cemetery. Lincoln is a well-known cemetery. Though it's suffered periods of neglect, it's still visible and operating. But that's not the case for many other Black cemeteries. Coming up tomorrow on NBC6 News at 7, we take a look at what happens to forgotten burial grounds hidden in plain sight. Sasha Jones, NBC6 News.
It's very important that we know our history in order for us to know who we are.
It's an old saying Enid Pinckney lives out. The 90-year-old is the driving force behind preserving one of Miami's most iconic Black historic sites. The historic Hampton House is one of Miami's only remaining Green Book motels. It served as a safe haven for Black travelers during segregation. Now, it brings visitors from all over to Brownsville. But today, Pinckney is visiting a different Brownsville historic site. Her parents are buried in Lincoln Memorial Park Cemetery. Both historic sites are a reminder of an uncomfortable truth about South Florida's past. Jim Crow laws separated white and Black people, not just in life, but also in death.
The tradition in the South was to bury Black people in the back of white cemeteries.
Experts aren't able to determine how many Black cemeteries once existed in South Florida.
What do you do to dead people, particularly the ones who are poor and Black, who have no legal protection, who have no advocates?
Many are now lost or forgotten, victims of sprawling development at a time when racist housing policies forced Black people out of their own communities.
Where you could bury somebody 50 years ago is now an apartment building. It's now a gas station. It's now something else.
Erasing some Black burial sites from public memory until
Those people were buried in the Lemon City Cemetery, and they didn't ask you to dig them up.
someone like Enid Pinckney speaks up.
You're disrespecting the dead. That's not right.
In 2009, construction crews unearthed human remains in this area of Little Haiti, previously known as Lemon City. Maps from the 1930s show a cemetery once stood on the property. This evidence did little to keep the site from being developed in the decades to come. When the site was rediscovered, Pinckney and other advocates helped stop a planned redevelopment of the area. Today, this monument marks the cemetery and lists more than 500 names of those buried, one of which
John Clark. My grandfather's name was John Clark.
would lead Pinckney to her own hidden history.
When I looked to see where it said spouse, it said Melvina Clark. That was my grandmother. That was the person who raised me.
Why wouldn't this site be recognized?
Dr. Alicia Wynn says the push to identify and mark Black burial grounds helps to safeguard an accurate account of the past.
Those in power can decide, what history is, and you can erase it, you can silence it, not even talk about it.
She took us to this park in West Palm Beach. It's the final resting place to 674 mostly Black migrant farm workers killed when a catastrophic storm hit South Florida in 1928.
They were actually brought here on dump trucks.
The storm victims were buried in a mass grave. The unmarked property, according to public records, will later become a part of a land exchange by the city of West Palm Beach. At that time, the mass gravesite was not disclosed, and the property faded from public view.
If you look through there, you can see way down there, there's a pillow there too.
Dorothy Hazard and her husband helped lead an effort to get the site marked.
The county and the city, they needed to do more to get this site and other sites that are unrecognized or not taken care of.
75 years after the mass burial, historic markers were finally placed at the site. The Hurricane of 1928 African American mass burial site is currently owned and maintained by the city of West Palm Beach. A spokesperson for the city of West Palm Beach told us the current administration believes deeply in the preservation of the site. Tomorrow on NBC6 News at 7, a local historian looks to find out what other burial grounds are yet to be uncovered. Find out why he says there's reason to believe a cemetery is hidden beneath the property of a local public school. Sasha Jones, NBC6 News.
What do you think of the neighborhood you're living in?
It's nice.
Reckoning America's past.
The real tragedy was that they took people's private homes.
Could mean uncovering what's beneath the places we drive past or visit daily.
Some of these were intentionally stolen. They were desecrated. They were built on top of.
At the state level, Representative Fentress Driscoll is pushing for the protection and preservation of Black burial grounds. But to protect them, you have to locate them first.
And right now, I don't think there's any acknowledgement that there are Black people buried over there.
Local historian and author Dr. Marvin Dunn took us to this location in Allapattah, a Miami-Dade public school parking lot. City of Miami Park and Fire Station sit between these 3 blocks off of Northwest 46th Street now. But this map from 1936 shows it was once a Black community called Railroad Shop Colored Edition. And Dunn says there's reason to believe a Black cemetery was erased at this very site.
Developed here for people who worked on repairing the railroad.
It's a place Kenneth Kilpatrick has heard about for years. He introduced us to his dad and aunt, who were born and lived in Railroad Shop as children. Their house would have sat directly in front of what is now Charles Hadley Park.
I remember I was crying. It was raining real hard.
Neither remember a cemetery, but they do remember being forced out of their home in 1947 when the city of Miami seized the property of Black residents.
I just remember being really frightened and really, really scared that they were going to do something to my grandfather.
With the families gone, the property was then used to build a school for white children, a school that is now named after the late Railroad Shop activist Georgia Jones Ayers, a teenager at the time of the evictions. Dunn says she told him about the existence of a cemetery here before her passing.
She knew it to be there when she was a little girl. I trust George's word.
We wanted to know what Miami-Dade County schools knew about this property. They shared this 1948 land survey and aerial photos from 1957. A spokesperson told us that, to the best of their knowledge and after looking at documents, there were no notes indicating an existing cemetery. There also isn't any reference to a cemetery on the 1936 map we found of the community, but oral histories, some of which are in black and white, suggest a cemetery could have predated the Railroad Shop community. Local genealogist Larry Wiggins, who helped in the rediscovery of another Black burial ground, pointed us to this Miami Herald News article. It chronicled interviews from old-time Miamians. One woman remembered families could buy parcels of land at the site of a Black burial ground, known as Evergreen Cemetery, which was reportedly relocated, and the land, they say, would become a part of the Railroad Shop Colored Edition. We found this 1920 newspaper clipping. It offers another clue. It makes reference to an evergreen-colored cemetery near the railroad shops offering to sell acres of land. What came of this offer? We don't know. But what we do know is it was not uncommon for bodies of Black people to be relocated. This 1916 birth certificate shows a baby buried in an evergreen cemetery was later relocated to another Black burial ground. Does a cemetery still remain at this site in Allapattah? It's unclear.
That just hit me. That's sacred ground over there.
But Dunn sure believes one does.
It's a parking lot, but it's sacred ground. That's hurtful to me.
We asked Miami-Dade Public Schools if they have ever used technology to detect the presence of possible graves at the site. They told us they haven't. We also reached out to the city of Miami, but are yet to hear back. A historically Black burial ground known as Evergreen Memorial Park Cemetery still exists today. We reached out to the current owner of the property to find out if they have any information that could point to whether their cemetery was ever relocated or if bodies from Allapattah were moved to their cemetery. We are still waiting to hear back. Sasha Jones, NBC6 News.